Hi everyone, it's a great pleasure to be speaking at the Global Entrepreneurship Week, and both because I love small and medium-sized business, because unlike large corporations, they don't have time or money to play politics or bureaucracy, so they have to really get it right. And for them, risks usually is a matter of survival. So talking to them is actually a lot more fun than to large corporations or government agencies that kind of play along because risk is popular or an interesting topic. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to meet, and I'm really grateful for the organizers because it's not very often that risk as a subject makes it on the agenda for the global entrepreneurship discussions or any entrepreneurship discussions, because it's usually the last subject we learn about. And the way history evolved is that we don't really get enough lessons in how to deal with risks. Because we face risk every day, and we think it's natural for us to understand what are the potential, upsides, downsides, what we can do to make better business decisions. And today, interestingly, we will talk about how that may not necessarily be true. But just before I begin, a few words about myself. I've been in risk for over 14 years now, and I've started my career in Australia. And that's why I sort of grew up, that's where I had my education in risk management, that's why I started my career in risk management, which is actually kind of a nice coincidence because there are two schools of thought. There's an Australian school of thought on risk management and the American school of thought on risk management. And luckily, the Australian school of thought in 2009 won and became the global benchmark for risk management everywhere in the world. And I'll talk a little bit about that, how ISO took the Australian school of thought and made it global. But more interestingly, in 2009, I got a little bit bored in Australia, so I moved to Russia. And one of the first jobs I did there was the head of risk of the Russian equivalent of Knowledge Oasis. So every country has a place for the small and medium-sized businesses, for the entrepreneurs, for the innovative companies to grow. It's like a techno park, it's an incubator, a university, very similar to what you have here. So I was the head of risk of the Russian equivalent. It was probably same size as Knowledge Oasis. I then was asked to head the risk function at the next level, which would probably for you be an equivalent of state government reserve funds of Oman. So it's a company that kind of deals with the savings and the future investment of the company. So I was the head of risk of those two organizations. And over that career, I've done some very interesting things, including being on TV show for small and medium-sized businesses, a story that I will share with you in a second. And I've written a chapter for a textbook for school children to start talking about risks in school so they can have a conversation with their parents, understanding what risk is, like how do you get a credit card, for example, how do you get a loan from the bank. Just the most basic things, trying to raise that awareness about risk management. And now we have a lot of education throughout the world and look after a lot of certification for risk management. So what I'll try and share with you is like a condensed version, specifically designed for small and medium-sized businesses. So the first real fundamental question, and by the way, there will be a lot of interaction, so be prepared to participate. I like to say risk is not for shy people, but I don't really have to say that to you because small and medium-sized business is not for shy people times 10. It's really risky, it's really exciting. So if you are doing whatever you're doing, that means already you're not a very shy person. So do participate. And the first fundamental question, something that you need to probably think about a little bit, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. By the way, if you have questions throughout, just raise your hand and we will talk about it. But the first fundamental question is, why would anyone on the planet think about risks in some sort of formalized, systematic fashion anyway? Like, why would you, as a business owner, as a business employee, think about risk? Why would you need to manage it? What do you think? What are the options?
To avoid them.
To what? To avoid them? That's an interesting perspective. Some risks you do in fact need to avoid, but in fact there's probably more risks that you want to take, because taking risk is usually what makes you a lot of money. And as small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, you know that sometimes you actually have to take a lot of risk, and by starting a business you've already taken quite a lot of risk. So interestingly enough, risk management is actually not about avoiding risks all the time. Risk management is avoiding some of the risks, which are usually required by law. Some risks are prohibited, like health and safety, for example, environment. You don't really want to take too much of that risk because you will be fined. But most of the business risks, you actually want to take more. But you want to understand what kind of risks you're taking, because just blind risk taking is usually leading to a disaster. So that's one option. What else? Like, why would you do that?
Mitigate.
To mitigate risks, to have a better chance of achieving whatever goal or objective you have. And that's all fine, but what are some of the other reasons why especially small and medium-sized businesses would want to take risk and would want to approach it in some sort of systematic, formalized fashion? Why manage risks?
To make plan.
To what?
Make plan always.
To plan for mitigate, you are correct, but we've already said that, so that's all the same thing. To mitigate, to plan, to deal with risks in a better way. If I can summarize all of this, I would say to be better at making your day-to-day business decisions. Risk management is actually a very powerful decision-making tool, and we will talk about that in a second. But what are some of the other reasons? Risk management is very pragmatic. I mean, it's a wonderful decision-making tool for yourself, but it's not just yourself who's interested in how well you manage risk. Who else? Who else outside your organization will benefit or be interested in understanding how you manage risks?
Your customers.
Customers would appreciate it, probably, especially if you're dealing with big customers. They would actually expect to see something that you understand and know how to deal with your risks. And that's a very powerful message. So you not only want to manage risks for yourself, you actually want to manage risks in the way that you can show to large customers, large government-based customers, to prove to them that you are a reliable partner. So that's a very fair comment, but who else?
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders, exactly, but like who specifically?
Lenders.
Sorry?
Your lenders.
Lenders is in your financing providers, right? As in banks? Yeah, so that's absolutely right. I mean, that is a very, again, powerful point, is you want to not only use it as an internal tool for yourself, when you come and ask for financing from a government agency as a subsidiary, or from a bank, or from a private investor, they would want to understand how well you understand your risks and how you're dealing with them. And it's a much better idea to come up with something already prepared that is going to communicate all that in some sort of globally accepted fashion. And in fact, that's a very interesting story. All the banks, for example, they assess your risks when you come to them. And if you don't say anything about your risks or how you manage them, what are the banks going to do? Sorry?
Turn it down.
They may turn you down, or more realistically, what are they going to do?
So they going to refuse their request for loan.
They may refuse request. I mean, that's like the worst case scenario. But more likely, they will actually do your risk assessment for you. They won't tell you about it, but they will use their internal scoring mechanism to give you a risk rating. And if you haven't told them anything otherwise, they will automatically rate you as the highest possible risk, which is not a lot of fun, because they will probably give you the highest possible interest rate, or whatever works in Islamic financing. But they will apply criteria that is different if you've told them otherwise. If you've told them how well you can manage you can manage risks, so you will potentially lose a lot of money, and they will treat you differently if you don't say anything about risks. But who else? Partners? Partners, for their comfort, they would want to understand and appreciate how well you understand risks. It's all about building trust and awareness. Who else?
Authority.
Investors, yes, same with banks. If you don't say anything to your investors about how well you manage particular risks, they will assume. And they will assume not in your favor. They will usually assume that things are worse than they really are. So speaking about risk is your opportunity to give them a level of comfort. Authorities is another one. Different countries kind of moving at different paces. Some of the countries now move to what they call risk-based audit or risk-based supervision. So authorities actually do a similar risk assessment for themselves, and they may rank you as the high-risk organization, and they will give you a lot more attention, which is not what you want. You want to have like a normal relationship, not as a risky entity. So whenever you're communicating with authorities, it's also a good idea. It's not going to take a lot of your time because you've already done it for the bank or for your investors. But you might as well just show it to the authorities as well. It may give them that extra level of comfort. I worked in a relatively large organization, so we actually spent months on preparing the risk conversation for the authorities because authorities had a lot of influence over the financing that we got. And they had they've done a lot of audits, so we've actually had a lot of conversations about risks with them. Who else? Who else would benefit?
Competitors.
Well, competitors probably. Competitors would benefit if they knew what your real risks are, so we would never disclose the real risks to competitors because it's very sensitive. But who else? Maybe not...
Suppliers, your suppliers.
Suppliers, yes, and that's actually very interesting. A lot of suppliers, particularly big ones, they actually insure accounts receivables. That means if they give you a credit, they insure that, and that means you will be forced to pay more for the goods that you receive, especially if you're receiving it from international suppliers. And by showing to the suppliers that you're actually pretty good at understanding and managing your own risks, you can really you can convince them that they shouldn't insure your account receivables, that they can trust you, and that will actually save you 1 or 1.5 or 2% of all your supplies. That could be quite a significant amount of money per year. So even with suppliers, I mean, who would have thought, but even with suppliers you can use risk information to reduce cost. And the final one, I've just talked about insurance. Who uses insurance in business currently? Anyone? Well,
Just for that employees. Just to make insurance for the employees, not for the
property, for health and safety.
Yeah.
But basically, insurance is another type of entity that would benefit from understanding how well you manage risks, because they also automatically calculate premiums based on the risk level, and if you don't tell them anything, they will make you a high risk. It's really that simple. If you don't tell anyone anything about how well you manage risk, they will automatically assume you are the highest risk possible, which is actually not fun because it usually costs small and medium-sized businesses a lot of money. So you can save money by doing some very, very basic risk management, and this is what we'll talk about. So there are 3 fundamental reasons why would anyone do risk management. First, it's a very powerful decision-making tool. So whenever you plan, whenever you think of a new venture, a new project, opening a new shop, there are risks involved. And using basic skill set of risk management, you can actually benefit quite significantly. The second reason, risk management is now expected. Most of the stakeholders from your business expect to see something. And they all expect to see something in a very simplistic way. I mean, that's the good news. All of the stakeholders expect to see the most basic things. So it actually doesn't take a lot of effort to do what they want to see. And the final one, if you're ever going to compete with international companies, or if you want to work with international suppliers, they again expect and they value having some sort of risk management in place. So those are the 3 reasons why you would ever do risk management. It's a good tool for yourself and your decision making, and it's a good tool to show people around the company to save money. And let's talk about decision making in business first. And I'll share with you some of the scientific discoveries over the last 60 years, which really, I guess, make us question just how useful or needed risk management really is. Because you may feel that you've been in business for a number of years and you're actually really good at making business decisions. You're actually really good at understanding your business and you're really good at making your day-to-day or strategic decisions. Well, interestingly, statistics tell us a different story. Historically, people are not very good at making business decisions and understanding the underlying nature of risks. So here are just some of the studies. McKinsey found that there's a 35% chance of turning around a project or a company that is not doing so well. So if for some reason the company is not doing so well, there's very small chance that you'll be able to turn it around. The reality, unfortunately, is quite tough. The life expectancy of companies has diminished significantly. A couple of centuries ago, we had companies that were family businesses for 200, 300, 400 years, well, maybe not 400 years, but 100, 200 years. Now the life expectancy of large companies is probably closer to 30 years. So clearly something is happening in the market that requires a lot more pragmatic risk thinking. The other survey found that 70% of large deals, initiatives, projects usually fail. So it's not a very, bright picture unless we become serious about understanding the risks. And there are a few reasons why that happens. And there's another survey by Harvard Business Review found that a very small fraction of companies actually apply modern-day decision-making tools. And really, there are three reasons why statistics or why the history kind of tells us that it's not an easy ride for small and medium-sized business, as I'm sure you appreciate. And there are a few reasons why that happens. I mean, usually to make decisions, to be good at making business decisions, you need a few things. And quality and timeliness of information has been historically an issue. It is less of an issue now because a lot has been automated. We actually have a lot of data to help us make decisions. But interestingly, some things don't change. So the data, we now have a lot of data to make changes and make decisions, but some things don't change. And the things that don't change is how our brain works. And we will actually play some fun games with you just to see how our brain works in situations of uncertainty. And what motivates us. What drives people's behavior. So a couple of things haven't changed much. And they mean that we better use some sort of proper tools. But let me explain. First, I'll talk a little bit about some of the research into how human brain works normally in situations of uncertainty. So, and I mean, that's what small and medium-sized business is all about. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Will there be demand for the new product? Won't there be demand? Is demand seasonal? How are competitors going to be behaving? Is the rent going to increase? What's the situation with foreign exchange? A lot of things are very uncertain in business, and that's natural. And interestingly, when we are faced with a need to make a decision on the uncertainty, we think we are rational, and we analyze stuff, and we make the best decision possible. But that's not, in fact, how our brain works. Our brain works in a very different and peculiar way. So until 1970s, the world believed that we are rational, reasonable people. Since 1970s, a lot of research in economics and psychology has been done to investigate just how reasonable people are in situations when there is not enough information. Whenever there is a little bit of uncertainty, whenever we don't know everything 100%, how does our brain change and how do we behave? So what the scientists have discovered, and that's actually pretty scary, they've discovered is that most people, whenever faced with a situation that is not 100% certain and they have to make a decision, they usually make mistakes. And interestingly, those mistakes repeat. So a different person placed in a similar situation would likely make exactly the same mistake. So it's not because one of you is bad or good, it's just all of us, our brains work very similar, and our brains work in ways that we have shortcuts. And I'll talk to you about that. So we're very good at making day-to-day, easy decisions, but whenever we're faced with something new, something uncertain, our brain continues to use the same shortcuts, but those shortcuts actually lie. So the scientists have called those mistakes, they call them cognitive biases. And it's instances when our brain lies to us about a particular situation. And we fully believe that we're making the best choice possible. But in fact, it's confusion. Our brain just confuses us. So let's test how that actually works. What emotions do you think this woman is feeling? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just like, it could be anything. What emotions? What emotions do you see?
Frustrated.
Anger, frustration. What else?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassment? Did you say?
Embarrassed.
Okay. What else? Grief?
Scared.
Potentially singing, celebration. We really don't know. It could be anything. What else?
Scared.
Scared. She could be scared.
Angry.
She could be very angry. So helpless could be. We have no idea. But what happens, or what you have just experienced, is what scientists call system 1, or quick thinking. The answer came to you immediately. You didn't have to make a lot of effort. Nothing in your body changed. Your muscles didn't tense. Your pupils in your eyes didn't expand. The body temperature didn't change. So there was no major chemical reactions that happened to you. And you looked at it and you go, okay, few options. Immediately it came to you. What about this example? What's the answer?
Calculation. Needs a calculation, so take some time.
What's the answer? Now, of course, the answer doesn't matter. Because what you have discussed, I actually don't know what the answer is because I never bothered to calculate, because it's not the point. The point, what you have just experienced, is what scientists call system 2 thinking, or slow thinking. And this is when your brain switches to a different mode to think about complex problems. And there are a few things that happen in your brain, and this is some of them. Some of you thought, I need to calculate it, and should I reach for my mobile phone to use the calculator, or is it going to be embarrassing? Should I take a piece of paper and calculate on a piece of paper? Some of you have probably thought, how do you multiply two big numbers? You first multiply decimals, then you multiply the second number, and then you plus it, like you started remembering how do you multiply big numbers. Some of you have thought, it's a fun exercise, so somebody in the room is going to tell the answer, so I'm not going to bother, I'll just wait, or the answer will be on the next slide. And some of you thought that I'm not going to bother about that, I'm not going to waste my time on calculating something that is not important. So there's a lot of thinking process that happened in your mind. You didn't notice it, but because this is not a big issue, but your muscles tensed a little bit, the pupils in your eyes expanded a little bit, and the body temperature raised marginally. Not a lot, because it's not a big deal issue, but your body changed. And this is what scientists call system 2 thinking. And just to summarize, here are a few examples of system 1, quick thinking, and system 2, slow thinking. Fast thinking or quick thinking is like when you're driving on an empty road and you can read what's on the billboard, or you can kind of grasp where the sound is coming from, or the day-to-day mundane tasks, like walking to the office the same way you walked a million times. Some of the most basic day-to-day activities that don't require a lot of concentration, that's our quick thinking. The slow thinking is whatever requires a concentration, like trying to focus on somebody's voice across the room, or trying to do any kind of business decision simulation, trying to think of a plan or forecast, trying to control your emotions. All of those things are examples of when our brain switches to what they call system 2 and try to use that to help us make a complex decision. And here's a quick summary. Fast thinking, unconscious, it happens automatically. We don't really have to put a lot of effort into it. It's really good for day-to-day decisions. However, it's very error-prone. That means system 1 thinking, the quick thing that comes to our mind, gives us a lot of false answers. It gives us a lot of answers that sound logical, that look good on surface, but are actually not true. And the opposite is slow thinking. We have to make a conscious effort. We have to make an actual effort. And interestingly, we have to make more than just effort. Our body spends energy, glucose in our blood. So to use system 2 thinking, we actually need a lot of energy in our blood. That means if we're hungry, for example, it would be almost impossible to switch on system 2 thinking. So it's a pretty good idea to not do a business plan or ask for financing when you are hungry. Because the science tells us that it will be so much more difficult for your brain to switch to system 2. And that means you'll be probably falling into a lot of cognitive biases, which we'll discover in a second. So system 2 or slow thinking is used for complex decision, and hence it's a little bit more reliable. And normally system 1 works well. I mean, this is what makes us human. If we didn't have system 1 thinking, we probably wouldn't survive as a species so long. Because when you're thinking of running from a tiger, you don't really go, should I run left or right? You just start running, because the system 1 thinking operates a lot quicker. Also, we probably wouldn't be able to play sport. I always use an example with ice hockey, which is not really relevant to you, but the ball in football flies quicker than our brain uses the information from the ball to the eye, from the eye to the brain, from the brain to the leg. So if we were watching the ball, we would never be able to run to the location where the ball would be. So we don't watch the ball. Our brain processes where it's coming, what direction, and where it's going to be in few milliseconds. So we just run to where we expect the ball to land. We don't actually watch the ball landing. And that means that it's wonderful that we have system 1 thinking. That's what makes us human. And it's great for most of the day, until we have to make a conscious decision in business. And sometimes system 1 lies to us. And here's a very basic example of, for a fact, because I'm going to tell you, that both lines are identical length. But your brain will still tell you that maybe the top one is a little bit longer, even though it isn't. But your brain will still tell you that maybe it is a little bit longer, maybe just a margin, but it's not, it's identical. And there are a lot of illusions like that. Our brain tells us something which is just not true. And we can verify that, and even if you measured it with the measuring tape and found out that they are identical, your eyes will not stop seeing that they are in fact maybe different length. And sometimes, it's little things like that, and it doesn't really matter. But sometimes system 1 thinking costs people a lot of lives. So it's actually quite dramatic. And there are many studies on that. But here's just one example. Imagine a situation where a parole board decides whether to release prisoners early on parole or not. And the setup is very simple. There are 8 judges. They look at each case, and they usually spend on average about 6 minutes, so it's something very quick. And they decide whether grant parole, as in let the prisoner free, or not grant parole. And the usual answer is no. So usually you have to do something extraordinary to be granted parole, because otherwise they'll just tell you, no, you stay in prison. And statistically, 35% of the people get a yes. That means every third person. So 2 no, yes, yes, then 2 no. So on average, it would be every third person. And yet, this is what happens in reality. So on the bottom is time, and on the y-axis is the percentage of yes answers. And this basically means is, in the beginning of the day, every second person, almost more than every second person, 70% get a yes. And then suddenly, the judges become more and more strict, and at some stage they just tell no to everyone. And then miracle happens, and again they're saying yes to every second person. And then they get angry, something happens in their brain, and they don't let anyone go, and then suddenly again another miracle, and then by the end of the day they just tell no to everyone. Why?
Coffee break.
Exactly. And this is just so simple. They eat. This is their meal breaks. And system 2 uses glucose, energy in our blood. That means when people are hungry, their brain does not work in the way that we expect them to work. And you can imagine this actually costs people a lot of lives. Like, I mean, if you're a good person, you have zero chance of being set free, regardless of what you've done, if you happen to be before the coffee break. I mean, this is pretty ridiculous. And there are other examples where people actually died because they misinterpreted a risk. So that's interesting. 65% approved after the meal and 0 before the next meal. That's a very good lesson for us. System 2 thinking and good risk management requires a lot of energy. And that means, don't think about risks, or don't do any important business decisions if you're hungry. That's why large companies, for example, whenever they have a meeting with senior executives, they put some food on the table, so people, and usually it's something sweet, like dates or something, so they can quickly get sugar up in their body, so the brain switches on to system 2 thinking. Otherwise, it's pretty dangerous. And now, I will show you a number of questions. We will just test how do cognitive biases affect each of you. Most of the questions that I'll show you do not have a right answer. So it's just literally just your view. So you cannot be wrong. That means do not be shy. Do not be scared of raising your hand. Each of the questions will have option A or option B. I will read the question and I will ask you who want to vote for A, and you will raise your hand. And if you want to vote for B, raise your hand when I say B. It's really that simple, but it will be much more fun if you all participate. So this is just an example of how our brain works. You won't know the answer to most of those questions because there's no right answer. It's just your personal perception. So first question. 600 people are infected with a deadly virus. Which program, which treatment would you select? Option A, and if you apply that pill, 200 people will survive. Or option B, if you apply that pill, 600 people will survive with a 40% probability, or no one will survive with a 60% probability. So think about it for 2 seconds. Try not to discuss it because it's about your individual brain, and we'll do a vote. So who's for option A? Raise your hand. Okay, who's for option B? A few people who didn't participate. There's no right answer, so you can't get it wrong. Okay, let's do it again. And let's now try everyone. Who's for option A? Okay, who's for option B?
It's the same, isn't
It could be, I don't know. Well, it's not really the same because there's a chance in one and no chance in another there's guaranteed. But anyway, at the moment this means nothing. So we'll move on. Next question. This one is easy. Which option will you choose? Option A, get $1,000 guaranteed. So you don't have to do anything, you just say option A, get $1,000. Or option B, you toss a coin, and if it's heads, you get $2,000, or if it's tails, you get nothing, 0. Who's for option A? Okay. Who's for option B? Alright, good. At the moment, again, this doesn't mean anything. I'll tell you in a second. Now, the next question that you'll see, you will have a burning desire to say something out loud. It will be unstoppable desire to tell everyone that you see something. Don't do it. It will be much more fun if you just keep it to yourself and everybody answers the next question individually. And I know somebody will break, because it's just going to burn you from inside. Do not say anything.
Go.
Another question about the virus. 600 people are infected with the deadly virus. Which program would you select now? Option A, 400 people will die. Or option B, nobody will die with a 40% probability and everyone will die with a 60% probability. A few seconds to think. Who's for option A? Okay. Who's for option B? Alright, that's actually very fun. Now, what some of you may have noticed is that this question is identical to the previous one. In fact, it's a reverse. So it said 200 people will survive out of 600, and here it says 400 people will die, which is exactly the same thing. The only difference is that it talked about survival in the first case, and it talked about death in the second case. And words affect people. This is one of the cognitive biases. It's called framing. As an experienced risk manager, I can make any risk on the planet super scary or very trivial within seconds. It's really easy for me to package any information in the way that I see fit. And that's very important. The information that comes to you or that you use to communicate with someone else, you need to be aware that that information is usually packaged in a particular way. And when you package information for the other external parties, for the banks or the authorities, you need to not overdo it. Because our human tendency is to package the information in the way that suits us. And same when somebody asks you to make a decision, one of your employees or one of your partners, they will ask you to make a decision. They will tell you about the decision in the particular way that suits them. So we need to, as risk managers, as entrepreneurs, we see through words. We actually don't pay attention to what people say. We try to understand, well, what's the meaning behind that. And we ignore some of the dramatic words. So interestingly, what has happened is I didn't remember who voted how, but what I've noticed is that some people changed their mind. So in the first instance you voted A, in the second instance you voted B, or the other way around. You've changed your mind. And that's actually normal. That's not because you don't understand something or you're not carefully paying attention. This is normal human behavior. Cognitive biases is not because you are not educated enough or you don't get it. Cognitive biases is the most normal human behavior. Like everyone does that. So as you can imagine, we didn't create those questions. We just borrowed it from scientists who have been studying this for 70 years. And this particular question has been asked thousands and thousands of times all over the world. And the global statistic is that when faced with the same question, in the first option, when we talk about survival, 70-something% choose option A. And in the second case, 80-something% choose option B. So same people switch their minds immediately depending on how information is presented. Something similar happened to us today.
Maybe you may judge the numbers here in the previous example. If you judge the numbers, you make the same decision.
Exactly. If you would have judged the number, like if you, and that's the problem with uncertainty, is that uncertainty is explained by the theory and statistics and probability theory, and that is not something that many people know and understand because we don't study it from the very beginning. So to actually understand risk, you do need to understand a little bit about the statistics and the nature. Here's another question. Now, this one does not have anything to do with the previous money question. So you don't have that $1,000 that you got in the previous question. You only have exactly how much cash you have in your wallet right now. Yeah, so you don't have any thousand from the previous question, it's a new question. Which option would you choose? Option A, toss a coin, and if it's heads, you give me $1,000, or if it's tails, you don't have to give me anything. Or option B, don't toss a coin, just give me $500. Yeah, very simple. Who's for A? Okay, who's for B? Like the 1/3 of people just refuse to participate in this because The thought of losing something is just too scary. But anyway, let's do it again. And you don't actually have to give me $500, yeah? So it's not a big deal.
Now become confident.
Sorry?
Now become confident.
Yeah. Who's option A again? Okay. Who's option B? All right. So now we've looked at the money question from both sides, and we can actually try and interpret that. The first question was very simple. The first question was, do you want guaranteed money or do you want to risk it? That's what I was asking. Do you like risk? When things are good, do you like risk? And 50-50 chance, tossing a coin 50-50 chance, is actually a lot of risk. It's like literally probably the highest risk possible, so it's complete uncertainty. It's really 50-50. So when I asked you, I said, things are good, you can make some money, or not make anything, but at least you're not losing anything, so things are good. And I've asked you, do you like risk? And most of you said, no, we don't. You said, we do not like risk. We want guaranteed smaller profit, but it's guaranteed. We do not like risk. And as a risk manager, I said, that's fine. It's not economically ideal, because sometimes we have to take risk to make money, but at least from a risk perspective, that's a predictable behavior. You would settle for less if there's no or less risk involved, and that's fine. What is scary is that when 1 minute later, I've given you a different problem, and I said, now things are not that good. Now you have an opportunity, or there's a chance that you may lose something. So it's a pretty bad situation, it's an uncomfortable situation. And I've asked you exactly the same question. Do you like risk? And a minute later, you told me, no, we don't. So only a small fraction of you voted for option B in the first case, yeah? So if you voted for B in the first case, making money, you already told me, yes, we like risk. And I said, fine, great, we can work together. But most of you said, no, we don't like risk. So I've asked you that question again. Now the situation is not so fun. And I've asked you, do you like risk? And suddenly, the same people that 1 minute earlier told me, no, we don't, you told me, we do not like risk. We would settle for less to avoid risk. Same very people told me, well, you know what, Alex, suddenly we do like risk. Apparently, when things are bad, we like risk. And this is a very normal human behavior and a very scary human behavior, is that whenever things are bad, whenever something is not going according to plan, the economy is not doing well, the customers are not buying as much as they used to, the competitors are becoming aggressive, whenever things are bad, for no reason except our brain tricks us, we become super risky. And this is just insane. The very time when we should be careful and thinking about risks, our brain forces us to become more risky. So just be mindful of that. Whenever next time you have to make a difficult decision, your brain will trick you into making a much riskier option. Your brain will trick you into selecting a much riskier option out of the few options that you have. Because this is normal human behavior. Whenever we feel uncomfortable, whenever we feel vulnerable, our brain goes, let's risk it all. And that's the opposite of good business decision making. And I wanted to share a study with you. In general, the concept is that, as you can see, if we just rely on our intuition, on our first impressions, on our experience, that could possibly be the worst possible case when making business decisions. This is an interesting study. On the top is what people are scared of. On the bottom, the real risk, what they should be scared about. So, for example, everybody's kind of scared about the plane crash, and they may drive without a seatbelt. Yet, the chances of dying in the car without a seatbelt are hundreds times more than dying in a plane crash. And people are scared of all the weird stuff, or sharks, for example. I grew up in Australia, so everybody thinks about, well, sharks are scary. Yet the chances of dying on the way to the beach are 1,000 times more than actually being bitten by a shark or dying from the bite of a shark. So our brain really tricks us into thinking about and being alarmed and scared about all the wrong things. We ignore the basic laws of laws of probability. And I wanted to, before we have a coffee break, I wanted to share with you some of those cognitive biases, because our behavior, and that's the same for every human on the planet, our behavior has actually been tried to be explained by the scientists. And each of those cognitive biases has a Latin or English or French name. They're like medical diagnoses. They're not diseases, but there are things that we would expect to see in most human beings on the planet. So here are just a few very basic examples that I'm sure you would recognize in yourself and in your business partners or your clients or your suppliers. So the first one is called professional deformation. And that's a very simple one. It means everybody on the planet views the world and makes decisions through the lens of their experience. That means if you have like IT education, that you would very clearly see IT risks, and you would understand what are the different intricacies when making decisions related to IT. Or if you had finance background, you would very clearly see financial risks. And if you had engineering experience, you would very clearly see some of the risks associated with the technology or the safety. And that's wonderful. That's how we get experts. We get people to see stuff that they experienced in. The problem is that means this particular cognitive bias means no human on the planet is able to see all the risks. That means we're like horses on the races. We have blinkers on. We see very clearly in front of us, and we're absolutely blind to the risks that are just outside of our experience. This is very weird. Like most basic things, like taxation, for example, or taxation may not be a big issue here, but like government legislation, just because it's outside of our field of study, our knowledge, our past experience, we will be completely blind to it. And that means as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we need to use some sort of tools, reminders, that will help us see stuff. So whenever we make decisions, we're trying to understand, well, what are the risks involved within option A or option B. Most decision making in the business is option A, B, C, or D. And we need to understand not only how much money we're going to make in each option, but what's the risk associated with each option. And there are tools that we will talk about today. There is a simple tool that we can use to make sure we don't miss something. But the other tool, which is even more important, and the lesson that we can learn from this cognitive bias, is under no circumstances think about risks by yourself. Don't do it alone. There's zero chance that you will not miss something big. A single person, our brain capacity is just not sufficient to analyze different risks associated with significant decisions. So do not make big decisions by yourself. It's a very simple rule. The other cognitive bias is what's called normalcy bias. Our brain tricks us into thinking that the future will be very similar to what it is today. And just because we haven't experienced any major drama or any major loss or any major shake-up or change, our brain refuses to even consider a scenario when something may just go completely different. Something completely, like a new technology that will just wipe out your type of business. Our brain is not built for thinking about something that hasn't happened to us. We're good at learning lessons and memorizing some of the things, but whenever something, our brain is just not built for thinking, well, what else out there may happen that we're not thinking about. The next one is called illusion of control, and that's a very weird one. Human brain is designed in a way that whenever we talk about our own stuff, like our company or our business unit or our team or our suppliers or our customers, our brain automatically makes us feel that the risks associated with something that we own are much less than they really are. we seem to feel, and that's normal for every human being again, we seem to feel that whenever we're doing something ourselves, it's much lower risk, it's much better, it's under control. It's, I guess the real life examples is, we, for example, feel more uncomfortable about flying on the plane than driving the car ourselves. Because when we drive in the car, we know that we're in control and we will make some sort of judgments that will avoid risk. And when we're flying the plane, we're not in control. Somebody else is flying the plane and we really have no ability to influence that. Yet statistically, the risk when we're driving the car is hundreds times higher than flying on the plane. And yet we feel much more uncomfortable about something that we're not controlling. Or for example, if you're driving in a taxi, your brain usually gives you ideas that if I was driving, I would take a different route, I would get there quicker, I would not get stuck in traffic, I would drive safer, I would probably change lanes better. Those are all little tricks that the brain tells us. We build, whenever we're doing something, we usually don't see the real risk. And that's a pretty big danger for small and medium-sized businesses, because there's not a lot of people that you can kind of talk to and validate some of your thoughts. And be prepared that whenever you're thinking about your own stuff, you would automatically downplay, downgrade, and not appreciate the real nature of risk. Not because you're reckless, it's human nature. The next cognitive bias is called overconfidence. And it really doesn't have anything to do with being optimistic or pessimistic about life. It's just every single human being on the planet is over-optimistic. Whenever you make forecasts, whenever you make plans, whenever you commit to something, we are over-optimistic. I mean, you've probably experienced it when you're late for a meeting and the person calls you and says how far are you, or when are you going to be here? And you usually say 5 minutes. And as soon as you say that, you know that for a fact there's no way you're going to be there in 5 minutes. It will take you at least 15 because you're stuck in traffic somewhere far away. But your brain just doesn't, it's very quickly, your system one thinking, quick thinking gives you 5 minutes. And as soon as you said it, you know it's a lie. And you know that this person will call you again in 5 minutes, it will be embarrassing, and it's ongoing. And yet we still do that every single time. And we do exactly the same in business. Whenever you build a budget or a forecast, or whenever you build a business plan to ask for investments, we underestimate, especially when we ask for investments or for a grant or for subsidiary from the government, we overestimate our ability to deliver, and we underestimate the effect of all the kind of surrounding, the competitors, the market, the suppliers. For example, they will deliver on time, or we will deliver it on time, completely ignoring the reality. So this is normal human tendency to overestimate our ability to deliver, to be on time, to be on budget, to deliver the quality. It's normal. That's, for example, why in large corporations, finance never trusts the business when the business tells them their forecast. So they use discounting. They cut in half. They say, how much money are you going to make next year? They go, 1 million. Okay, we'll put 500 in the budget. Just in case you've been overconfident in that. So not everybody discounts by 50%. I mean, that's the best possible scenario. But usually there is some sort of discounting. Make sure whenever you plan, you ask yourself the question, just how confident are you that this is all going to happen as you plan? And if you're being honest with yourself, you will soon discover that actually there's probably a little bit overly optimistic. And usually you need to put some sort of buffer to allow yourself some space. The next cognitive bias is called framing. We've experienced it today. And this basically means people interpret and use information in the way that information is presented. So just because somebody told you something, we have to be knowledgeable enough about cognitive biases to not trust them just because they said something. Or just because somebody comes to you and makes a proposal, you need to continue asking the questions, and you need some sort of tool, checklist, to ask the right questions. Because just because somebody didn't mention anything about licensing, just because somebody didn't mention anything about financing or human resources, it doesn't mean those risks don't exist. People will usually package information for us to make decisions in a particular way. We need to see through that. Well, luckily, we have tools for that. Another cognitive bias, and this is a very interesting one, and by the way, you don't have to remember all the medical terms, but like the concepts and ideas. And if I remember, I may not have, but I'll tell you the book that you can read more on the actual science behind all of this. So the next cognitive bias is a very interesting one. Our brain is designed in a way that whenever we made a decision, whenever we've selected a particular path, for example, we're going to do this type of business because it's more profitable. Our brain has some sort of hypothesis that this is a good idea. Whenever we've done that, regardless of the new information that comes and says, no, but there's a lot of competition and the other business product is more profitable, if we've made a decision, our brain is designed in a way that will reject new evidence to protect the initial thought. And this is very dangerous. Our brain will come up with excuses, with reasonable, very logical excuses why the new evidence is not trustworthy, why we can ignore it. It's fascinating. Whenever we made a decision, it's actually very difficult to convince us that initial decision is the wrong one. And our brain works in fascinating ways. If you're talking to someone and they confirm something that you believe, you only need this much evidence. So if anyone in the room says, yes, that's a big problem, or let's go to a new suburb and build a new shop there, and that kind of fits with your logic, you go, yes, that's a great idea, wonderful, we're on the same page. You don't need a lot of evidence for that. But if anyone says something that contradicts your view, something opposite, you need this much evidence, not to change your mind, but just to shake it a little bit, to start questioning things. Our brain is very unfair. As soon as we've made, and that's why, for example, it's so important to make that first impression on your clients. Because the first hypothesis that they've made about your company is something that will be very, very difficult to change in the future. If you think that you are high quality or low quality, cheap or expensive, once they've made that first decision, it will be then very, very difficult to change that perception in their brain. Same with confirmation bias, it's kind of a continuation of that. And irrational escalation is another very interesting one. And we've probably experienced it in our life. Our brain works in a way that once we've kind of paid money for something, once we've purchased something or bought something, I don't know, like a car or a new vacuum cleaner for our house, or something, a new computer for your office. Once we've bought something, and after that we realized that it wasn't really such a good purchase, it's not as good as you expected, it's not as powerful, you spend too much on petrol. Once you actually discover that this is actually not a good decision, it was a bad decision to begin with, your brain will continue tricking yourself to believe that no, this was in fact a good decision. Your brain will come up with excuses why it's still a good decision. And not only that, and this is so funny to watch from the outside. Not only you will convince yourself that this is still a good decision, you will try to convince other people that this is a good decision to protect yourself from embarrassment that no, I've made a mistake. Our brain works in a way that admitting to a mistake for us is so much more painful than the pleasure we get from being right. It's not proportional. So we would do anything to avoid anything possible. And again, this is the same for everyone in the world. We'll do anything to avoid admitting that something was not a good decision. I've observed just some amazing situations where a friend of our family bought a new pram for the child, and it broke 2 times. And so the person clearly is not happy with the product. And we bought the same pram, and it broke for us as well. So we know it's not a single instance, it's like it's a bad product. And it's a very expensive pram. And the third person who just had a baby, she asks, like, what pram should I buy? Should I get the same as yours? And our friend, she goes, yes, it's such a wonderful, and she goes on explaining like what a wonderful pram it is. And we're standing there and going like, no, it's not. It's broken 3 times. It's clearly, statistically, it's a horrible product. Do not buy it. But yet, something in the brain tells us to continue convincing ourselves. Another set of cognitive biases, there's not a lot left, but they're important to understand because this is how humans behave all the time. Without us understanding that sometimes it's our chemistry that driving the behavior, we make the wrong assumption. We usually think that whenever our partners or our suppliers or our large customers or our banks do something, we think it's because they're bad, because they're trying to somehow make it worse for our business. But it's not really the case. Very, very rarely people do something because they're bad people or because they're trying to harm your business. Most of the time, people and suppliers and contractors do stuff because that's what normal humans do. We just have an unrealistic expectations. We have an expectation that everybody will be rational. But that's not what the science tells us. Science tells us whenever the situation is uncertain, people are not rational. In fact, they do the opposite. They behave in a very irrational way. And every time when somebody behaves irrationally to us, we are surprised. And we expect them to do something, but they do the opposite. And that really surprises and sometimes upsets us. And we need to fix that. We need to be aware that most people will actually behave differently when dealing with our business. So this one, this cognitive bias is called the mission bias, and it's an interesting one. Our brain is built in a way that whenever we have to make an unpopular decision or choice, or whenever somebody has to make a difficult choice, and that difficult choice, that level of difficulty may be very different. So for some reason, for some people, difficult may be just picking up the phone and calling your supplier. That may be difficult already. So our brain judges a difficult choice as much worse than not doing anything at all. So whenever you ask somebody, a supplier, a government agency, a customer, or a partner to do something, and it may be difficult for them. And again, the level of difficulty is different for different people. For some people, even calling on the phone may be considered difficult. So when you expect them to do something which is simple to you, but may be interpreted as difficult for them, their brain will tell, do nothing. Not because they're bad people, because they don't want to help you, but because our brain is designed as whenever we have a choice, do nothing, or do something that is somewhat uncomfortable, the brain automatically chooses do nothing. And it's quite bad. It means you have to motivate people, you have to promise them more, you have to give them more to do that something, because for them it's not an equal opportunity. It's not do nothing is not the same as do something. For them, do nothing is always better than doing something which is uncomfortable. The other cognitive bias is called pseudo-certainty effect, and it's an interesting one. Whenever there is an opportunity to make money, whenever there is some sort of upside, some sort of promise of making money in the future, we immediately become blind to the risks. So whenever you have a new potential contract, a new initiative, you have a new project or a new partner, or you're about to sign up a new customer, be aware that your brain will automatically switch off when it comes to understanding what the risks are. So you'll be so excited about a new opportunity that your brain will become blind to all the potential risks. And it may be fine. Risks don't always happen. It may be fine, but you may set up yourself for very expensive failure in the future. Just because your brain automatically becomes blind. And again, it's not because you are like that. It's normal human behavior. Whenever we have some sort of positive expectation in the future, we immediately become blind to what the risks are and is it a good opportunity as we think it is. All right, this final one is called zero risk bias. And it's an interesting human tendency. We're perfectionists. Our normal kind of expectation or behavior is we want to reduce risks to zero. Like we want to minimize, we want to get rid of risk. Now that of course is not real because risk is part of day-to-day life. I mean, in fact, the official definition of risk in the ISO standard, ISO 31000 standard, is risk is effect of uncertainty on objectives. So there's always uncertainty whenever you're doing something in business. That means there's always risk. Risk is not a bad thing, it's part of doing business, it's normal. And yet, our human tendency is we're trying to reduce risk to zero, to avoid risk altogether. Now that of course is impossible in business. And interestingly, when we realize that, for example, we can't get rid of some of the risk associated with our customers or suppliers or logistics or competitors, instead of saying, well, if we can't get rid of risk at all, let's at least try to manage it to some sort of reasonable level. But that's not how our brain works. As soon as we realize that we can't get rid of risk, like competitors will always be there, our brain tells us, well, let's then not do anything at all. Like, let's just not worry about competitors anymore. Which is, silly, because there are risks that you have to constantly deal with. But our brain works in a different, interesting way. Our brain works, if we can't get rid of it, let's ignore it, let's forget about it. Which of course is the opposite of effective business management or risk management. And when I was speaking in the break with Abdullah, it was interesting that we mentioned that understanding cognitive biases is a very important skill when you're talking and dealing with customers. Because, for example, and I'm sure you've experienced that, and you may have experienced other situations and do share. But this one in particular, I mean, when you come to a customer, somebody else's customer, existing customer, and you say, switch to our product or switch to our service, and we're better, we're cheaper, we're quicker, and you tell all those things. But in the human brain, it goes, do nothing, or make an effort and switch. And do nothing is always better. It's just, not because they're lazy, not because they're bad customers. That's how human brain works. And we shouldn't be surprised when they choose do nothing, so we have to persevere, continue doing something. That's why selling to new clients is so difficult, because for them, the choice is very simple, do nothing. So continue staying with existing supplier, or switch. And switch is always the less preferred option. Even if they can save money, time, and improve quality, this is just how amazingly strange our brain works. And I'm sure you've come across other examples. But these are some of the. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's some of the cognitive biases that we picked out because they're particularly relevant to making decisions in business and managing risks. In reality, there are actually more than 200 different cognitive biases that have been discovered over the last 67 years. And there's been a lot of research in that field. And one particular scientist, his name is Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize in economics in 2002. And interestingly, this year, another scientist won a Nobel Prize in economics for his studies in cognitive biases as well, in how humans make decisions under uncertainty. So there's now 2 Nobel Prize winners in this field of study, and it's called risk perception or neuroeconomics, understanding how our brain works when we make choices and when we make decisions. And who do you think become the best at understanding how human brain works when making decisions? What part of business have thrived and become the best at understanding and influencing our brain at the chemical level? Marketing and advertisement. And this is what you experience when you go shopping. And I don't know if there's a saying, like there's a saying in Russian, like, don't go shopping hungry. Because when you go shopping hungry, you don't have enough sugar in your blood. And that means your system 2 thinking, your rational thinking, is not able to be switched on. that means you make emotional purchases. And the people who sell you stuff in shops have been amazing at understanding the actual science behind emotional purchases. So the bottle of ketchup and the color of the chocolate is not a coincidence. It's all specifically designed to influence you to make a particular decision. The placement, the colors, the sizes, the shapes, everything is there for a reason, because marketing is really good at understanding the science behind that. You should be as well. Small and medium-sized businesses should appreciate that most of these things are actually very scientific. It's not a coincidence. It's not because some people are good and some people are bad. All people are predictable when making a particular decision. I mean, some of the most scariest things that neuroeconomics have discovered is that scientists, by monitoring your brain activity, can find out what kind of decision you will make 8 seconds before you make the decision. So before you realize what decision you're going to make, the scientists that are monitoring the chemical activity and the electrical activity in your brain already know what you're going to decide. Like left, right, A, B, they can already tell. So that there is some scary research that is going to happen in the next decade or so in neuroeconomics. But already we know there are a lot of cognitive biases that impact on how we negotiate, make decisions, and whenever we're faced with uncertainty. So all the tools that we have as risk managers have been designed in the way to kind of counteract or protect us from those cognitive biases. So in fact, the whole purpose of risk management is really simple. The whole idea of risk management is to make you switch on system 2 thinking. Whenever you make a decision under uncertainty, system 1, your quick, your fast thinking, will automatically give you the answer. And most of the time, if the situation is new, if the situation is uncertain, most of the time that answer will probably not be the right one. So risk management is about making us stop and spend 15 extra seconds or 1 minute or 5 minutes extra to make a decision using system 2 thinking. And system 2 thinking is not going to just switch on because we said, okay, let's switch on system 2 thinking. We have to actually apply a particular tool set to switch on, to force ourselves to switch on system 2 thinking. Luckily, we have the tools for that. Interestingly enough, risk management has a lot of tools. And there's kind of been this scientific research in risk and consulting research in risk, which is non-scientific. And most of the tools that are consultants over the years, and it's like large international consulting auditing companies, that they have created have nothing to do with science and actually provide even more deception and more incorrect answers. But the scientific tools are relatively, they're not perfect, they're not ideal. They're not going to tell you what the future will hold with a large certainty, but they will uncover things that you normally don't see. And I promised that I'll mention a book that may be useful for you. Well, Daniel Kahneman, one of the Nobel Prize winners and one of the kind of fathers of this research, has written quite an interesting book. It became a bestseller in probably many countries in the world. And it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's not an easy book to read, but it's much easier than his actual scientific papers. So it's been kind of dumbed down for the general reader, and it's a bestseller in a lot of Western countries. And it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. Very interesting. It talks about the system 1, system 2, how they interact, and the cognitive biases. So if you're ever going to read anything, you might as well just start from the very original source. Now, the other thing that impacts people's decision-making under uncertainty, cognitive biases is fine, but there's one more thing that really impacts on how people make decisions and what choices they make. And that's their salaries and bonus payments if you have something. Now, just be mindful that whatever people are paid for, that's literally exactly what they'll do. Humans are very driven by financial incentives. And in small and medium-sized companies, it's probably less of a problem because everybody's kind of, it's relatively transparent, everybody's kind of making similar, and you don't have complex motivational structures. In large corporations, it's a nightmare because people set KPIs and they get bonus payments and they get difficult equations to calculate how much money they make, and that just completely messes up the people's brain, and they just behave completely unreasonable. But just be mindful when you put a target to your sales employees, which doesn't really account for risk. For example, most companies have made that mistake, is when they said, you need to sign up 5 new clients. And they don't really kind of mention, should they be good clients, bad clients, what kind of risk should be associated with those clients. So you would always get those 5 clients if things go well, but it usually be at what cost? So most of the companies that I've worked with, for example, the equivalent of the knowledge oasis in Russia, we had a target sign up 1,000 startups and innovation companies. And we of course signed up 1,000 startups, only to discover that as years go by, only some of those startups are innovative, only some of those startups are proper good businesses, sustainable. Because when you go after quantity and you don't actually talk about the quality and the underlying risks, it usually ends up always the same, is that you get a lot of stuff, you achieve the target, on the paper it looks amazing, but in fact the company has obtained a lot of unnecessary risk. So motivation has a huge impact on how people behave. Not only our brain, but also our kind of desire to make money is equally as important. Be mindful of that. So risk management has some of the answers. It's not panacea, it's not going to solve all the world's problems, but whenever we have to make a decision under uncertainty, certain tools in risk management, even though some of the tools in risk management are very complex and require risk modeling and thousands of scenarios to be simulated, there are some easy tools that can be used by small and medium-sized businesses. So I will, for example, not talk about Monte Carlo simulations today, but I'll mention some of the tools that are so easy that you can apply them literally now. And in fact, we'll try. As I mentioned, risk management is a set of tools designed to help us make better business decisions on one side, and on the other side, it's a set of tools designed to help us create some sort of document that we can then go and show to the banks, to the insurance companies, to the governments, to the authorities, to the suppliers, to the joint venture partners, to international customers. So it's 2 things. One is it will help us make better decisions, and that's very important. But the second one is whatever we do, we have to package it in a way that is kind of recognizable. And the reality is making decisions with risks in mind is actually much more difficult than just creating a piece of paper that kind of looks risk management. Creating pieces of paper that looks like risk management is super easy, which is a good news because you can start having those conversations and start saving money with suppliers and banks and authorities tomorrow, because it's that easy to create a risk-looking document. And the good news is, risk management has been around for years, so there's a checklist and a template and an example for literally everything. And I'll tell you a place where you can download all of this stuff for free. In fact, what I wanted to do after this little discussion with you, and some of you already asked whether you can get a copy of the slides, well, we can do better. Instead of giving you a copy of the slides, which I don't really do, but I have a book which is free, and it's 100 pages, and it covers pretty much everything you ever needed to know about risk management. I saw that when you were signing up, most of you listed your emails, so it's perfect. We're just going to email you all that book at the end of the seminar. Which means if you haven't put your email, and you want that, do it. But you don't have to. So there are a number of tools that I wanted to discuss that help you to not miss the risks, understand the risks, and present the risks in the way that mitigate them, and present them in a way that is accepted and understood globally. So the first tool is very simple. The first two tools, actually, they're designed to not miss something important. The idea is that you need to understand your own risks better than your investors or your banks. Because you need to prove to them that you understand your risks better than they do. Because if you don't prove to the investors or the owners or the authorities that you understand your risks better than they do, they will assume that you don't understand your risks and they will penalize you through more expensive goods or more expensive investment or financing or something. They will penalize you in some particular way. So there are a few things you can do. And tool number one is called official name is risk taxonomy, but that's pretty complicated. It's basically a checklist. For every business, there is a checklist that reminds you what kind of risks usually exist in any kind of organization in the world. I mean, it would be strange if after decades of risk management, we didn't have an already prepared checklist of what the usual risks are in business. It would be strange if we were always required to try and identify it from scratch. In fact, brainstorming risks on a piece of paper from scratch is literally the worst you can possibly do, because you will immediately fall into a lot of cognitive bias. So there's a checklist, and the checklist that is used for business usually looks at a number of areas within an organization and outside of the organization where the risks may come from. And by the way, on the screen you see the link where you can download that particular checklist that I will be talking about, but you don't really have to, because in the book there's a whole chapter on risk identification, and that checklist will be mentioned there. But let's just think about it. What are the major sources of risk? Like, for example, when I look at any kind of business, I know that the risks may come from 7 different sources. And I can, by asking you like literally 7 questions, I can immediately find out like what kind of risks are affecting your business. What are the major sources or direction? Like where's the risk coming from? What are the factors in the business that create risk? And I'll give you the first example. First one is always the team, the people. So whoever's working in your company, they possess risks to the success of the company. What kind of people-related risks do you think exist? There are many, so it shouldn't be difficult to know. What kind of risks may affect your organization if we talk about your team? Yes?
Maybe I might find someone who's lazy and doesn't finish on time.
So there's one particular, so you're absolutely right, one particular risk is something to do with competency. Is that people may not know how to do, or they may not be committed to doing something, so that there's that potential issue. That's whatever set of competencies you have may not be sufficient to get the objective. What else?
No cooperation between them.
Poor communication, some sort of conflict within the team, so that's another potential that may affect the company objective. What else? The what? So somebody may, so one of the key employees that is very significant to the success of your business may leave. And they may leave because they're hired by someone else, they may get sick. So there's what they call a key personnel dependency. Is that if there's someone in the business that understands the nation, like he's very important, losing that person for whatever reason may be a significant issue. What else?
Efficiency.
How effectively, how proficient they are. Yes, absolutely. What else?
If you're providing service and you depend on someone, so you have to catch that person as a code and keep it. So it's very hard if that person leaves the company, it will affect everything.
That is also an issue, but not your team dependent. So at the moment, there are different sources of risk. So we're just talking about the team. Team is being one, and I mean, let me make it very simple. So there's the whole idea of risk management is to understand how it affects your objective, objectives, or a decision. And there are, let's say, 7, and team is the first one. And it has like competency, key person. What else? You may not have enough employees like this. You don't have a not only your existing employees may not be competent enough in a particular thing, but you just literally may not have an expert in marketing, for example, sales, or an engineer or an IT person who is crucial to the business, but you couldn't find it. What's the second? Like, what's another area? I'm just trying to highlight just how easy risk management is when you think about it in some sort of structural, logical way. And unfortunately, we don't usually have time to think about risks in a structured and logical way, and that's why System 1 thinking deceives us into thinking and getting into all the cognitive biases. But risk management is really super straightforward. So there's already an answer on the internet that you can download. But let's just see how we can logically come up with a similar answer. What's the second one?
When someone not planned for that expected change and that around economical.
Okay.
I mean, when the market is changing, one time is active.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So the next area of risk that affects any business on the planet is what you would call a market or demand, or market to demand. Market demand and changes in the economy is just one of many reasons, like one of many underlying risks that kind of falls under. These are like little umbrellas. So under each, or not umbrellas, they're buckets. Like under each bucket, you will have a number of risks, and that's how the checklist looks like. It has the heading, team or like people-related risks, and then it just lists specific things. And then it has like market to demand, and then lists specific things. So one of the risks that falls into the market bucket is how's the economy doing, because that affects our customers' ability to pay and their general kind of feeling for spending, general desire to spend. So that's one big one, obviously. What else would fall under the market and demand bucket?
You go for government regulations.
Potentially changes in some sort of government policy that will affect the market, which will, I don't know, like make your product illegal, or opposite, lower the licensing requirements, so there's a lot more competition that may come in. And if somebody mentioned competition, that's another risk that would fall under the bucket.
Staying in one level with no development.
So some sort of issues that prevent the company from growing. Maybe changes in maybe difficulty with logistics, for example, something that will prevent company from reaching new markets. Change in customer preferences, like suddenly everybody loves a new product or a new drug or a new as in medicine or a new technology, so something that just changes in human minds and your product is no longer relevant. What else?
Nature.
The what, sorry?
Nature.
In what?
The environment of the nature, like something like force majeure or something like that.
That may some sort of natural disaster may impact on the demand or in a particular region. Like, for example, if there's a flood or something, that people will not come to your shop anymore. So that potentially that could be, yeah. And so,
financing tools. The financing tools.
yes. Interestingly, because finance and everything to do with money is such a big element of business, that it's actually one of the next buckets. And we'll talk about it definitely. Anything else that?
Yeah, accidents. Accidents can happen like a fire or what's called some natural from the nature.
Yeah. Again, agree. If it affects the market or the demand, if it affects your production or your shop, that would usually fall into a different category. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, this checklist, there are probably dozens of them in the world, and it's not a matter of creating a perfect checklist that will fit for everyone. It's just about getting a general understanding that to think about risks, you need to always think about different sources. So we've already mentioned two more. Finance could be one, and let's call it production or something. It's basically whatever you do to provide the service or the product that your business delivers. So, for example, all the fires, that would affect this type of risk. In finance, let's go sequential. In finance, what would fall under the financial bucket? What kind of risks?
Liquidity or cash flow.
So liquidity is one. Liquidity means you have enough cash to pay your outgoing commitments. You can pay rent, you can pay electricity, you can pay for suppliers, and your money coming in is sufficient to cover all your expenses. So that's a big one. What else?
Taxes.
Taxation obviously falls under that. So that is, again, a good. And taxation is a risk because there may be changes in tax regime. There may be new taxes introduced. So that's an issue that we always need to be mindful of. What else? Competition is in the market because it affects the demand for our product. What about what else falls under finance?
Crash. Loss, maybe?
Of what? Crash of what? Well, it's actually interesting because I mean, crash sounds like fun, but in reality, because if we talk about market crash, and it's not one of the risks, but the idea is right. If we talk about market crash, financial crash, for example, what happened when everybody, like when there was a financial crash? What did banks do? Or what did they stop doing?
Loans.
They stopped financing and stopped giving loans to especially small and medium-sized businesses because they were perceived as higher risk, and the banks had problems with liquidity, so the last thing they wanted was to finance riskier business. So that means one of the risks in our finance bucket is ability to attract new financing. Are we able to get the new financing, the new loan in time, and at the cost that is not going to bankrupt the business? What else? Like foreign exchange usually falls in here. I mean, foreign exchange is only relevant if you're buying something from overseas or if you're buying something that depends on the price of foreign exchange.
Currencies can be.
Foreign exchange is currency. Yeah. So all that. What else?
Maybe cost of finance.
Cost of financing, yes, definitely.
Price
So that
price of like oil price or product price.
yes, fluctuation in prices, yes, that could either fall in here or in here. It doesn't really matter like where you put it within each bucket, but as long as you remember about it, that's a good thing.
Asset valuation can drop in financing.
It could significantly, if it's relevant for a small, medium-sized business, if you have some sort of assets that you rely on their price increasing. For example, if your business is in the real estate that you own, or the business owns, you may expect the real estate to prices to continue to rise, and then that will allow you to get more money from the bank up for that asset, but the real estate market drops and your asset doesn't cost as much, and it will be difficult to get money for it. And so on. So there are a few risks associated with insurance usually falls in there. The bank counterparty, like where do you keep your money? Do you keep it in the bank that is safe, or do you keep it in the bank that may lose its license? I'm not sure if it's happening here, but in some other countries, banks lose licenses every day. So some bank loses its license. Next bucket is everything to do with the actual product or service that you deliver. And to make it more kind of realistic, give me some examples of what kind of product or service your company is like. Who's working in small and medium-sized business? What do you do? Give me a couple of examples.
Photography and filming services.
The what, sir?
Photography and filming services.
Okay. So for you, production would be coming into events and performing. You taking the photography and doing the advertisements as well. So for you, risks that would fall under this bucket would be breaking of equipment, not being able to get on time.
Raw materials. Raw materials.
Well, raw materials in filming now everything's digital, so raw materials technically is less of an issue unless your equipment is your raw material. But that's of course is significant. Technology itself is relatively safe. So let's try another one. What's your company?
My company is automotive services, the sale of spare part.
It's what? The
Automotive services with the sale of spare part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what kind of services? What is it? Repairs, maintenance? Or?
Repair with maintenance, investigate for problems, all these things. I'm providing the spare part for customers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what would be the biggest risk that would fall under kind of the main operations?
That delay of suppliers, supplying
What's in terms of the actual? What's the actual in terms of actual process of doing repairs and checking for maintenance?
Sorry, I cannot hear well.
What is the? All of those risks are relevant, but they're kind of outside. What's the biggest risk
The production line.
associated with your actual activities, like the actual maintenance work?
Mainly, I get two problems with finance and that things not be in the time.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the risks that may fall into this is not doing the work in time, but it may have something to do with suppliers. But let's step out of this cognitive bias. Just because something never happened, it doesn't mean it's not the highest risk. So let's all think, for a maintenance and repair shop, automated repair shop, what's the biggest risk in terms of the actual process? Oh, not really.
Breakdown of machinery.
The what?
Breakdown of machinery.
So breakdown of machinery could be one, yes, and breakdown of machinery could lead to what? Which is the biggest risk?
The consumable itself for that assist.
No.
The consumable of the assist itself.
Yes.
That after sometimes that will not work anymore, so you need to prepare for that.
Yep. No, absolutely, that's also true. But I'm trying to steer you to the what's the biggest risk in a high risk technical activity?
It's delay of repairing the automobile.
Not really.
It's losing his customer.
Safety-wise.
Of course. I mean, let's prioritize. Safety of personnel, like people get under the cars, and you probably have cranes that raise cars, and potential safety incident may cost somebody their life. So there are risks associated with the actual production process, and that's all the safety issues. That's all goes in here as well. But of course, delays, breakdown of equipment, not enough materials to allow to supply. That all also counts. What else? Give me some other business that you're working on, because there are a few other risks which are not relevant to your two types, except maybe for video and photo production. Is there may be a scenario where a new technology comes out, and that just dramatically changes how you do your business. I mean, with like wedding photography, drones would probably change how we capture video and photos at events, because there'll be more. And the risk is that the new technology will come out, and the customers would want that, but your business has not invested in the new technology, and your competitors have, and hence they're better positioned for that. But let's think of any other business. Like, what other businesses involved? Yes. Yes.
So people are shifting their interest from newspapers to.
Yeah. Well, and big time. Look, we kind of already accept, which is fun because I mean it wasn't the case like 10 years ago. We now accept that social media is so much more powerful and more money making than newspapers, traditional newspapers. But it's now even more dramatic. I think I've read it either yesterday morning or today morning, I can't remember the news, is that social media has now an online information resources overtaken TV in terms of making money on advertisement. So like newspapers are history, now TV may be history as well, because we get more information and more news and more content from online now. So clearly, like, changing technology could be a huge risk for some of the industries. Give me any other industry.
Online shopping.
Okay, so online shopping, interesting. I mean, the virtual reality kind of comes into that, and people would like to see how things like look with them. That may be the future. What else in terms of production? For you, the production is actually maintaining the servers and the website and the functionality. So for you, the risks in this bucket is all the IT-related risks that may break down, server downtime, credit card details not secure. All your personal data and cybersecurity would probably come under that. So there's a lot of different risks for different industries, but there's a bucket for all your specific business risks usually. Now, what's the next area of concern that every business has? And you kind of mentioned already it. Where else do the risks come from? The what, sorry?
Kind of quality.
Well, technically speaking, like all your quality-related risks would fall under the actual, like, this is the core of business. So you just put everything in this bucket.
Suppliers.
Yes, and I mean, I'm sure you're all right, but let's do it one at a time. So this is what you mentioned. One of the biggest risks is that suppliers don't deliver on time, and hence you have to delay the repairs.
The repair on the service.
Yeah, and suppliers is the next really big one. That we often overlook because we're so concerned with like our own issues. In some industries, it's the opposite. We blame suppliers for everything and forget about our own risks. In some industries, it's the opposite. We only think about our own stuff and we completely forget about the suppliers. But there's a huge bucket of risks associated with suppliers. What are some of the risks that would fall there?
Within suppliers?
The what?
Talking within suppliers.
Yes, within suppliers, yes.
Failure to deliver.
So, one of the obvious ones is that they do not deliver on time. The alternative to that is that they deliver on time, but it's horrible quality, or it's counterfact or something. What else?
Less communication between the suppliers and the dealers together, sometimes changing the price without awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You will deal with the direct customers with the price. You will find yourself you are losing because of they change their price.
So there are a few things that you mentioned. First, the suppliers may deliver the wrong thing, and the more important one is that suppliers, whenever we talk about suppliers, one of the risks that immediately arises is that the prices fluctuate. And the prices may rise, which will significantly impact the margins that you have in your business. And if your margins are really small, then you'll have to pass on that increase to your customers. And in some industries, like airlines, for example, some businesses are really good at passing on risks. For example, and actually that happened in my lifetime. So I remember when there was a single price for the ticket. Now, if you recently booked a ticket, you know that there's the price for the ticket, and then there's a surcharge, airport surcharges, and then there's the oil price surcharge, the fuel surcharge. So the airlines automatically transfer some of those to the customers, which is not fun when the oil price goes up. The cost of flying increases. I don't think it decreases when the prices of oil go down. It's weird, but it certainly increases when the price of oil goes up. But many other companies don't have the luxury of automatically increasing the prices just because the suppliers changed their pricing and they have to eat into the margin. So that's a little bit, that's quite a risky thing. And what else?
Logistic.
All the logistical risks. Customs transportation companies, storage, all of those are very significant risks, especially if you buy a lot of supplies. It has to be stored somewhere. If you have particular type of goods that you have to be stored in, like temperature-controlled cars and places, that adds another layer of potential risk.
Some political problems can affect this point.
Of course.
Yep. Due to stopping one type of product or sticking on border, bringing things from another country or something like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's the other two? And yes, we can call it regulatory. And this is something that we need to be mindful of. Authorities, government strategy, changes in legislation, all of that affects businesses in a lot of different ways. So ignoring those risks just because something never happened to your company in the past is quite dangerous. I think the only other one is maybe like legal. Maybe legal when somebody, like customers are unhappy, they complain, or partners sue you, or you infringe on copyright, or you use somebody's intellectual property. So those are just some examples. And in the book that we'll email you, there'll be a link to that risk checklist. Also, there's a link to the risk checklist on your screens right now that you can download. And those checklists, it's a very quick and useful reminder that there are always much more risks in any kind of business decision that our brain can come up with. And we don't have to recreate the wheel all the time. We have to use some sort of tool. And luckily there are tools like that. The only problem with checklists is that they provide a good reminder for some of the most generic risks. But there's always something unique about your business, something that your business is very specific about. So be very mindful that usually in this bucket, which is your production or operations, like this is the nature, the core of your business, something that is in the checklist usually will not provide you sufficient guidance, because it will talk about like safety-related issues, change in technology, equipment breakage, like damage to the building, for example, that you operate in. All of those things will be listed, but there's also something usually very specific to your business that you will not find out on the checklist. So that's when you have to talk to the other people in the team and say, well, what are some of the more interesting, more specific risks that are not sort of captured in the external checklists that affect our business? And there are tools for that as well. I probably won't have time to go into that now, but because I want to cover two other tools with you. But again, in the book, it's all there. And the tool is called decomposition, when we take our objective and we break it down. The second tool that I wanted to very briefly share with you today, it's called Bowtie diagrams. And some of you that have engineering background may or may not have come across that. Has anybody heard about Bowtie diagrams?
Yeah.
Yes? Good. We in risk management borrowed it from firefighters. Firefighters borrowed it from engineers many, many years ago. The idea is very simple. Not only identifying risks because of all the cognitive biases is difficult, sorry, it's also difficult to actually figure out what to do. Because some of the risks you may already know. Like customer demand is an issue. Or like competitors is an issue. Then the next kind of logical question to ask is, well, what can we do about these risks? And our brain, our system one thinking, will immediately give us some ideas. The problem is that those ideas usually coming from system one thinking, and they may not actually solve the problem. They may not be ideal solutions on what to do with a particular issue. Because when our brain asks a question about something complex, like what to do, how to fix it, we usually don't have the answer. We need to break the problem down into something more narrow, something more tangible, to make sure our system 2 thinking switches on, and then, surprise, surprise, the answer usually comes. We have a lot in our brain. but we have to force our brain to switch on to system 2 thinking to see the solutions. Because usually there's not a single solution, but there are a number of solutions. So, Bowtie diagram is a wonderful tool designed specifically for that. Switching on system 2 thinking, switching on slow thinking, because the answer is usually in our brain, but if we just ask ourselves what's the answer to that particular problem, we will not get it, because it's like it's somewhere deep, and we need to look for the answer. So the Bowtie diagram works it's very simple. We take any particular risk, and we just put it in the middle, and I don't know, it could be like demand, change in demand, or lower demand. And the Bowtie diagram works in a particular way. It has left and right sides, and basically it's saying every single risk on the planet has a number of reasons or causes. Like, why would demand be lower for your product? Maybe economy, maybe customer preference, maybe competitors, maybe because you're expensive, maybe quality not good, maybe because nobody knows, like awareness or something. But the message is very simple. Every single risk on the planet has a number of different causes or reasons why that risk may affect your business. Now, the Bowtie diagram also kind of goes into every single one of those reasons also has, and I mean, I'm writing 3 things, but it's not 3 things. It could be 2, it could be 5, it doesn't really matter. The whole idea is that every single one of these reasons also has a reason why that happens. So like economy, why is it bad? Oil price lower, government making more stringent rules or something. So there are reasons for literally everything. Why the customer preference is changing, because the new technology came out or something has changed. Why the competitors is an issue for the demand, because they're being aggressive, because they have some sort of new market entry strategy. So there are reasons, always reasons why certain things happens. And like, this is just how simple and amazing risk management is. By doing this, the most basic exercise, which, by the way, actually, to be fair, it's not going to be easy. Because I've done those bow ties like 100 times, I can do them in my mind within seconds. But in reality, when you sit down with your team on a particular issue that you've been struggling for months or years, and you try to do that, it will actually be quite difficult to do it first time. But if you do it like 2 or 3 times, it will be super easy. It's a very simple tool. So you try to identify what are the reasons why that particular risk is an issue, and what are some of the underlying reasons, like what are the second level reasons. And not only each risk has a number of reasons, each risk has a number of consequences as well. So if the demand is going to be lower than you anticipated, then it would usually mean a number of things. It would usually mean you'll make less revenue, because you'll sell less, or you'll have less customers, or your price per sale will be lower. But it probably means that you'll also increase costs, because you'll have to do additional advertisement, you may engage new salespeople, so usually there's some sort of cost element, and it may potentially impact on the reputation of the brand. And each of those consequences also has a number of kind of flow-on effects. So if the revenue is lower, that means you may not have enough money to pay for the loan that you have, or you may not be able to prove the subsidiary that you've received from the government, or you may have to delay the expansion or the growth that you've planned. So it will have some sort of flow-on effect. I mean, lower revenue by itself is pretty meaningless, because it may be, if you're good with cash, lower revenue may mean nothing to you, because you can survive like following 3 years because you have cash in the bank. But if you don't have a lot of cash, lower revenue may mean immediately some sort of significant bad news. So it's very important to kind of map out what the causes and the second level causes, and what the consequences and second level consequences. Now this sounds so easy to do, but once you do it, your brain, by doing this exercise, by having a discussion with 2 or 3 people in your team, is the most basic exercise. Like, I mean, real risk management is like, complex mathematical modeling in special like software in Excel and Visual Basic. So this is kindergarten stuff. And even doing this kindergarten stuff, your brain will automatically switch to system 2 thinking. And by analyzing what the underlying reasons are, you will start discovering that by doing something here and something here and something here, you may actually impact that issue and you may be able to deal with that particular risk. And you will feel much more comfortable because you see the whole picture instead of just kind of brainstorming ideas. Brainstorming is really not a good idea when it comes to risk because cognitive biases are so great. There are so many of them that usually it's better to use some sort of tools that on paper allow your brain to switch to system 2 thinking. And this is probably the most complex tool that you need to understand in terms of small and medium-sized business. Now, those are the 2 tools, very simple, checklists and Bowtie diagrams. Templates for both will be in the book. Those are the tools to help you make decisions better. There is another tool to help you not only make better decisions, but to package the information in a way that you can share it with the external world and save money. Now, who has a business plan or has seen a business plan? Yes? Many of you, I presume, have seen a business plan. So, business plan or whatever other document that your company has, let me kind of switch on from the next step. Who has seen or prepared or worked on a financial model? Financial model is basically like any Excel file where you calculate the numbers for the business plan. Has anyone seen that?
Inventory, you mean?
It could be inventory, yeah. But usually it's something more than that. It's just all the costs and all the revenues and it's kind of some sort of forecast that next year we will make that much money.
Yeah, business.
But basically, if you haven't seen it yourself, someone in the company where you work must have seen it, because to do a business plan, you know there are like tables with numbers, some sort of forecast, some sort of promises. Well, they come from somewhere. They come from an Excel file usually that calculates some of those most basic projections. And the key takeaway, the key lesson that I wanted to share with you is that if you're going to present risks, that it's better to present risks in the document that you're going to show